What's up guys, Kudo-kun here. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new-ish Kickstarter campaign that looks to revive the much-beloved Naruto CCG called Primal. If you don't know anything about the Naruto CCG, first of all, hi, nice to meet you, I'm Kudo-kun. That's pretty much all I talk about nowadays. I am going into this video assuming that you are very much aware of the Naruto CCG, but I will break down some of its elements for you here, just in case you're like the 1% who watches this video and doesn't know about it. In the Naruto CCG, you and your opponent take turns playing characters from your hands. Once those characters are on the field, you team them up with other characters and then send them out to battle against your opponent's teams of characters. If your opponent can't defend themselves, then they have to take cards from the top of their deck and place it into a special area called Battle Rewards. Once you've forced your opponent to take 10 cards from their deck and put it in this Battle Reward area, then you win the game. The main pull of this game is the sense of progression. At the beginning of the game, you're playing literal 12-year-olds to the battlefield, and by the end of the game, you are summoning these massive monsters or these legendary characters within the Naruto universe. If all of this sounds pretty interesting to you, then I would recommend just going and checking out my other Naruto videos, probably my best card game of all time edition video, because it goes into a bit more detail. Of course, this new game won't be exactly a revival of Naruto because it won't be using any of the Naruto IP, which should be fairly obvious to everybody, but I am going to get that out there. Instead, this new game takes the mechanics of the Naruto card game, but puts a spin on it by using a mix of unique characters. While the artwork itself is primarily anime-based, there's a fairly good mix of different art styles here, and you should find something that you enjoy regardless of what you're into. You've got your typical pretty boy shonen anime characters. If you just can't let Naruto go, you've got bigger-than-life dragons and monsters, you've got League of Legends characters, you have some more realistic-looking characters, you have some downright adorable-looking characters, and you've even got some more lewd characters for filthy degenerates like myself.
That's quite big. Impressive.
As a small disclaimer, the creator of this card game did send me some promos because he watched my other Naruto videos and thought I might like them, and I did. They are fairly awesome. But I have not been offered any monetary compensation, nor have I been offered any future products to make this video. If the creator of this game does decide to send me more product in the future, then that's great, and I'm looking forward to it, but it's in no way being offered to me as compensation for the creation of this video. As such a huge fan of the Naruto card game, of course, if a product comes out that promises to be a replica of it and continue my love of the game into future generations, then I'm going to be interested in talking about it. So a few really quick differences in this game and the Naruto card game. First things first, there's no reinforcement deck at all. As far as I can tell, you just play with a deck of 50 cards. There's nothing to copy the extra deck. There are no client cards, essentially, and that includes any kind of replacement for client cards. That entire concept has been removed from the game. Growthing is just not a thing at all in this game. The game has something like a replacement for platoons, but they're essentially characters that can be played normally as well. This mechanic is known as transformation, so you can play a transformed character normally on the field, just like any other character, or if you have the earlier version of that character on the field, you can move that to the Essence area, which is this card game's version of Chakra, and then put in play the new character. Most characters with transformation will then trigger some kind of effect based on the fact that they were transformed into play rather than coming into play naturally through deploy. I'd like to get out of the way right from the get-go that I really enjoy this card game and I think it's really awesome. From what I can tell, it seems very faithful to the ideas behind the Naruto CCG. But Kudo-kun videos aren't about showering something I love with praise, it's about picking the nits, and unfortunately there are definitely some big nits to pick. I just want to get out of the way that regardless of what I say here, I do really enjoy the game, and I do think anybody who was interested in the old Naruto CCG should check it out. But I am going to give this game a little bit of a verbal beating with some of the things that I say here. My biggest problem with the game is actually a design decision that a lot of you are probably going to see as not a big deal at all, but I absolutely hate it with every fiber of my being. I hate that the archetype of the characters is included within the character name, making it look more cramped and a little bit slobby. The Naruto CCG still had archetypes, right? This character here, for example, is a member of the Fuma clan. And I know that because if I look in the red characteristics area, I see the words Fuma Clan. So when a card references the Fuma Clan ninja, I know exactly where to look to see whether or not a character falls into the Fuma Clan tag. And look how much nicer the name looks just standing there on its own. Hanzaki. That's it. It doesn't say Fuma Clan Hanzaki because it doesn't need to. I know it seems like a small thing, but if we just took this part and made it red and moved it down here, I think these cards would have looked a little bit nicer. The red characteristic text is a lot smaller than the name text, so if you're worried about cluttering up one of those two spaces, I'd probably pick the characteristic space over the character name space. When you've got a card as nice looking as this, for example, it just would have been nice if maybe the card name was just Argelia, and the Cane Pirate part was put within the characteristic so that we still know that she falls into the Cane Pirate archetype. Again, I know this seems like the absolute teeny tiniest of things to point out, but it really truly bothers me because I think these cards would have looked really nice if this one change had been made. And if what you're worried about is making the characteristic tags so big that you need 2 lines for them, Naruto did it and nobody seemed to have a problem with it then. So yeah, that's my biggest complaint out of the way. Even if you might not see it the same way, this is definitely the biggest change I would have made to the game if I had a choice. Power-wise, the game is starting from a fairly late point comparatively to the Naruto card game. I'd say that the power is roughly equivalent to sets 21 through 24 without doing more in-depth research. Keep in mind that this is on top of the game missing a lot of mechanics that the Naruto card game had, so it's kind of like playing Naruto in set 1, but the characters have powers and abilities that are comparable to sets 21 through 24. If you need an example of what that looks like in Naruto, then look at Analysis of Competent Sasuke. This was seen as a very good card at the time, because if you were fighting against Genin or lower ninja, then he was a 4-0, which was very powerful for turn 0 at the time. But he came with the downside that if your opponent was using a higher rank ninja than that, then he shrunk back down to a 2-0, and in injured status he was pretty much useless. And then later on in Naruto's lifespan, oh look, there's a Sasuke that's just 4-0 all the time, and his injured status is really good too. While there were many factors to the downfall of Naruto, I think some people would agree that power creep was at least a factor in the game slowly dying down. So it does make me a little bit nervous to see how powerful the cards are compared to the beginning of Naruto. I don't see it as a huge problem though, because a lot of the people who are going to be interested in a game like this are people who played the Naruto card game, and those people often fantasize about what the game would have looked like if it had continued past set 28. In fact, some people are so passionate about this that they went and they made fan sets to show what the game would have progressed into. So starting the game at such a powerful state means that we will probably get that chance to see what some of these concepts would have looked like had the game actually progressed, so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It's bad in some areas, but also has the potential to be really cool because we'll get to see the next evolution of the Naruto formula. I'm not sure if I like the implementation of archetypes so early into the game. One of the things that made Naruto archetypes so impactful was we already had a baseline idea of what each of the elements were supposed to do. Lightning was about gathering chakra, fire had the best jutsus in the game, earth was about protection, wind was about drawing cards, and water had the best control effects. So when it came time to combining some of these elements together, you could figure out which of the 2 aspects of the game you really wanted to build with. Like if you wanted a very controlled heavy deck, then you would normally gravitate towards something like earth and water. But if you wanted to trade some of that protection for maybe a little more card draw, then you would swap out earth for a bit of wind. After that had already been established, then archetypes came in and swapped up the formula a little bit. Wind, for example, would branch out into having medical ninjas and female ninjas. And then you would have an archetype like Gaara in the Sand Village, which played completely different from the female and medical ninja archetypes, even though they were all within the same element and had access to a lot of similar tools. Since we're starting with archetypes right from the get-go, and it seems like every card is designed to be within an archetype, it's really hard to get a feel for what the element itself is supposed to do, and whether or not the things that I see on the cards are things that are supposed to be associated with the archetype, or things that are associated with the element that the archetype is a part of. I notice, for example, that the Cane Pirates seem to play a lot like traditional lightning in that they can actually gather a ton of essence very quickly. But is that because C is going to take over the old role of lightning in that C is going to be all about gathering a lot of essence? Or is that because the Cane Pirates are about gathering essence and C is going to be represented in some other way? As a player, it might not bother a lot of people, but as somebody who researches these card games, it's a little bit messy. The clashing art styles will be a problem for some people, but personally, I don't really mind it. Naruto art styles also tended to vary wildly sometimes and try out new things whenever new types of cards would come out. So you can find all kinds of cards within certain sets that just look completely different than anything else the card game had seen previous to that point. And when you compare them all, they don't really have a coherent style a lot of the time when you're comparing those cards. You can make a fair argument that the clashing art styles work a lot better in Naruto because we had already had an established idea of how the cards look, so when something new came out, it was a fresh take on something we were already familiar with. I do think that makes the clashing art styles a fair criticism, but again, I also just don't see it as that big of a problem because I actually really like how different the art styles are. Chalk that one up to personal preference, I suppose. Take a look at this picture. Do you know what card this artwork comes from? Okay, I'm going to tell you, but you need to pay attention, alright? I'm only going to go over this once. This is Captain Cane. You know, character card, leader of the Cane Pirates. Have you got it? Okay. I'm going to test you then, alright? Let's make sure you get it. What artwork does this card come from? Which card is this? What, Captain Cane? What the heck are you on about? This is Scourge of the Sea. It's a turn 2 strategy card. It's not even a character, you dummy. Okay, now that I'm looking at them side by side, I can see where there was a little bit of confusion. Because it would seem to me that the creator of these cards just copy-pasted the pictures over to both of these cards, so they are different cards but have the exact same artwork. You get one. This one slides, but I'm watching you. The point of this revival should be to fix the problems within the Naruto CCG, not repeat them. Dragon Kid is the only archetype that doesn't have any super rares. Why? When you have an archetype-based game, you can't just give all of the archetype super rare cards except for one, especially when you have a button on your website that specifically looks at each archetype. It makes it look like the Dragon Kid archetype is either inherently weaker than the other sets, or is just a little bit underdesigned. I haven't looked deep enough into the individual cards yet to know if that's true, but from the outset, it just makes them look inherently worse than the other archetypes. This card looks kinda cool, so does this card. I don't normally like to encourage stuff like this, but it is your card game. Maybe just inflate their rarity a little bit and bump both of these cards up to being super rares. If you think they're just not strong enough to be super rares, then, I don't know, maybe boost up their stats a little bit. I know it's not the most fair assumption, but people equate rarity to being good cards within the game. No super rares makes it look like this is not an archetype that you can actually build a deck around, and I don't think that was the intention. The elemental icons are a bit over-designed in my opinion. There's no real coherence between any of them. And if I can be brutally honest for a second, some of them just look a lot better than others. Fire and Sea both look like they have a light shining across them, which gives them a sort of glossy or metallic feel. But when you look at an element like Plasma, it looks so flat that it really doesn't fit with the rest of the icons. I know that in the early days of Naruto, we had kind of different icons for each of the elements. For example, fire was like a diamond shape, and then there was a fan shape for earth. But they would eventually fix this and bring all of the icons into a more coherent style, and since you're already starting from the remains of Naruto, I figured that that would be one design element you'd want to take from them. The thing that I find really interesting about this is I notice that on your ability cards or anything that has a cost, you actually have smaller, cuter icons for each of these elements. Maybe everybody else doesn't feel this way, but for my money, I would almost just have gone with the smaller, cuter icons and just blown them up a little bit and put them in the corners of the cards. I actually think the mini icons look nice enough on their own, and it's a really easy way to see what element each card is without having something as big and blown up as these icons are. If you're going to have icons that look so wildly different from one another, I at least would have just picked one shape and then had all of the elements within that shape. If I had to pick one of these icons that looks the best, I think the Terra icon is probably the nicest. So maybe keeping that uniform shape from Terra, but just redesigning the inside a little bit to look like each of the other elements would have been a slightly better idea than trying so hard to make each of them stand out. The colors and icons are good enough indicators to what element each of the cards are. I think the rest of it just makes it look a little bit sloppy. On that same note of color and card types, I think it was a mistake to color each card based on which element it comes from. I know this idea makes sense in theory, and it works for other card games like Duel Masters, but one of the things that made Naruto's color coding system so clear was the fact that every single card type had its own color border. So when you look at your opening hand, for example, you can tell from a glance how many ninjas, jutsus, and missions you have. If I'm playing a mono C deck, and all of the cards in my deck are blue, then when I look at my opening hand, it's just a giant shade of blue, and I have to look through each individual card to see exactly what I have. I'm not saying this ruins the game or anything dramatic like that, but since this is something that Naruto got so right, maybe taking this element would have been a good idea. This also makes a little bit less sense when you consider that some of the cards in your game are dual colored. Since the border around the card has to represent one color, instead of representing both colors, it just represents whatever their top icon is. So if I have an all-black Necro deck, but I want to borrow a couple of cards from the other elements, then I have a couple of really awkwardly colored cards within my deck, and you don't even get the coherency that you normally got from all of the cards having the same color border based on their elements. To reiterate, I'm not saying this sucks, burn the studio down, but Naruto didn't have its different colored borders for each card type randomly. That was a very deliberate decision that had a very deliberate effect on the game, so just taking that would have been a good idea. The icons for the card types all look fine, and they're all easily recognizable. Strategy cards are boxes, ability cards are diamonds, and character cards are a stack of pancakes. Two other icons that were taken from Naruto, though, were the turn counter, although they didn't use the shuriken, they actually used something that looks like the shield from Knight cards, and the updated version of the hand cost symbol. A couple of things to say about this. One, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the shape of the turn counter. I'm not saying you guys should have used the shuriken, but I don't really get why the shield made sense here. It made sense when Naruto used them for the knights because they're knights and knights have big shields. But here, it seems really out of place. A little portal symbol, like a little swirly thing would have been cool. A gem. A face. Heck, since you encourage people to use a dice block to keep track of their turn counter, even maybe just like the shape of a dice block would have been nice. You could have just taken the outline from like a D10 dice, and that would have been cool. I just don't get what shield has to do with what turn these cards come out from, and why shield is the icon that unites them all. Also, I may be alone on this, but old hand cost symbol, way better than new hand cost symbol. If I were going to take one of these two designs, I would have went with the old design, hands down. Old hand cost symbol supremacy! You want a real nitpick? Here goes. I don't like that the name for combat attributes has been changed to skills. When I think about a character's skill, I think about their activatable effect within their card text. If the word on the bottom right of the card is the skill, then what is that activatable effect text? I can't call it an ability, because ability is a phase/card type within the game. I think just a more common word like attribute, or style, or combat art, or power source, or some other descriptive word would have been a little bit better than calling them skills. From a glance, it seems like this game might run a little bit slower than Naruto, so to make up for that fact, I would have liked to have seen the higher turn counts actually used when making cards. Unfortunately, after doing a card search, I found out that turns 7, 8, and 9 don't even have any cards associated with them. I'll have to do a deeper dive into this game and see if the game actually is slower than Naruto, but even if it's not, I would have liked to have seen at least one really nice boss monster come out of those higher turn counts. The game is available to play on Tabletop Simulator. Hooray! You have to do a really awkward search for the cards you want through each of the starter decks, and then use this little side pocket here to fill out any cards that you don't have. Boo! While I do appreciate all of the cards being available here so that I can hypothetically maybe try out this game with a few of my fans, I don't like the fact that there's not just one stack of cards that has every single card in the set. I mean, you've already gone through the trouble of putting the extra cards in here, maybe just make one stack that has every single card that I can search for cards out of. Website doesn't have a card list feature that lets me view an image gallery of all of the cards in a set. Why? As far as I can tell, websites have had this feature since websites and card games have even been a thing. So why on earth does a website in 2022 not have this feature? The card search feature is robust and allows you to look up any type of card that you want from the game. You can even sort the characters by turn count. You know, all of the turn counts, like 1 through 9. All of the turn counts, all of them, from 1 through 9. I did not make enough coffee for this. Every competitive Naruto player knows that turn 0 cards make up about a fifth of your deck. They are a very important part of your deck that you have to get ready fairly early. If somebody's going to play this game competitively, one of the first things they need to do is be able to see all of the turn 0 cards very easily so that they can figure out what the metagame's going to be during the first few turns of the game. I downloaded the app. The turn 0 search feature is on the app. Why is it not on the website? The website is how most of us are going to build our decks because you can go back and forth between the search function and a notepad document. Go back and fix your website, you dick! In the Naruto CCG, there's a phase called the Exchange of Jutsu phase, where you and your opponent take turns starting and then resolving jutsu chains. This game, of course, has a parallel to that called the Ability phase, but the wording of the Ability phase makes it sound like there's only one exchange of abilities between you and your opponent. If this was done intentionally, I don't fully understand why. There was a lot of nuance and complexity in starting multiple jutsu chains, one of the main elements being that once your jutsu have resolved, they go to your chakra area and then can be used to pay for even more jutsu. If the creators of the game meant to retain that element, then they didn't, because according to the instruction manual, there can only be really one chain of abilities, because once both players pass, the entire phase ends. If they got rid of it intentionally, I don't fully understand what the reasoning would be. Like I stated before, there was a lot of nuance and complexity within the ability to start multiple jutsu chains with your opponent, so taking that element out just sounds like a worse idea. However, this is one of those points that I'm willing to concede on until I get to know the game a little bit more, because it could be that having multiple ability phases would actually break certain elements of the game. So I'll reserve my judgment for the time being, but I just think this is a really weird change to make from the original game based on what I know about this game so far. However, this rulebook does clarify something fairly interesting that was not very well handled in the Naruto CCG rulebook, and that is the idea behind blocked teams. I don't want to get too far into this subject because I've already planned to go in depth with it in a future Naruto video, but basically, there was wording within the early Naruto CCG rulebooks that implied that if you blocked your opponent's team with a ninja and then that ninja disappeared, either sent back to your hand, made a standby ninja, or just died to a jutsu, then that team remained blocked, so your opponent still didn't get any battle rewards, even though there wasn't a blocking team during the showdown phase. Again, I won't get into the specific wording as to why it worked this way, but in this game, teams are not actually assigned blocked or unblocked status until the beginning of the showdown phase, once all abilities have been completed. I want to believe with all of my little kudo heart that they did this on purpose to make sure that there was an absolute definitive clarification that a team that is not blocked during the showdown phase gets battle rewards regardless of whether or not a team was sent to block them during that turn. However, once again, I'll leave a little bit of leeway here. If this was not done on purpose, then this needs to be changed because this is what the wording of the rulebook seems to mean at the current time. I know a few of you might be getting on my case right now because, this is their card game. How could they possibly have misconceived anything within their own creation? If it says it in the rulebook, then that's the way it was meant to be. No ifs, ands, or buts. You may have a point there. Why would I doubt anything that comes out of the rulebook? Another important element is the blocking of teams. To clarify, when you're sending out your blocking teams as the blocker, there are multiple steps. Step A. For each team that the attacker sent out, the blocker chooses to send out one of their teams to the battlefield to block in battle against that team. Characters that are not sent out to block are called standby characters. After this step, we get to step B. For each team that the attacker sent out, the blocker chooses to send out one of their teams to the battlefield to block in battle against that team. Characters that are not sent out to block are called standby characters. Wait a second, did they... Oh dear. Copy pasting, what is this, Captain Kane promo art? I got duplicates of that promo, by the way. Did you do this on purpose? Did you know this would happen? Are you messing with me right now? I do believe I've picked all the nits that I care to for now. Once again, I'd like to say that I'm very excited to see this project get up and off the ground. The fact that it's already met its pledge goal puts a smile on my face, and if you're interested, you still have about a week or so to go and donate to the project before it closes. I, myself, probably won't be donating to this game or buying into it for at least a little while, due to financial reasons. Ha 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 ha. But regardless, I am excited to follow the project and see where it goes next, and hey, if you really enjoyed this video, then maybe you can join me on Tabletop Simulator and we can play a round or two. I know this is somewhat short notice, but about 5 or so hours after this video goes up, I'll actually be doing a live stream going more in-depth on the cards and doing a little bit more card research, so if you're interested in that, feel free to join me. If you're going to be seeing this video a little bit further into the future, then that live stream is probably already up on my channel, so feel free to check it out. If you do happen to miss a live stream, don't feel too bad. Again, I know I'm springing this up on you a little bit out of nowhere, but due to my schedule, this is really the best time to do it. And if this live stream goes well, then we'll probably be doing another one in the very near future. I want to thank the Primal team once again for putting this card game together for us to enjoy, and for hopefully being able to take a couple of little jabs here and there. And I want to thank you for making it to the end of this video. Links to the official Primal Kickstarter and website will be in the description below if you'd like to take a few hours to do some research before you join me live. But that's about it for today. See you guys next time!